They say love is unconditional. But what if that's the biggest lie you've ever believed? Every man knows the fear, even if he never says it out loud. You have her everything: your time, your money, your strength, your future. She tells you she'll stand by you forever. You want to believe her. You need to believe her. But in the back of your mind, a quiet voice whispers, "What happens if I lose it all? What happens if I can't provide, can't protect, can't perform? Will she still love me then?" You've seen it happen. The man who lost his job, and days later, lost his marriage. The guy whose girlfriend disappeared when his confidence broke. The husband abandoned in his darkest hour of sickness. Each story feels like a warning shot. And yet you tell yourself, that won't be me. My woman is different. My love is stronger. My bond is unshakable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If it can happen to them, it can happen to you. Because loyalty isn't tested when things are easy. It's tested when your value slips, when life strips away the things that made you desirable in the first place. This video will reveal a truth about female loyalty that most men are too afraid to face. And once you understand it, you'll never look at relationships or yourself the same way again. Stay with me until the end. What you're about to hear will hurt, but it might just set you free. We like to believe loyalty is eternal. We like to believe that when someone looks us in the eye and swears, "I'll never leave you," those words are carved in stone. Every man wants to hold on to that comfort, because the idea of permanent devotion is one of the few things that makes the chaos of life bearable. But what happens when reality tests those words? What happens when the foundation of your value, your strength, your status, your ability to provide, crumbles? Most of us avoid the question. We bury it under hope. We silence it with excuses. And yet history has already answered it in ways so brutal that no fantasy can survive. There was a time when millions of men had their lives torn apart overnight. They weren't criminals in the way we think of crime. They were soldiers, teachers, writers, workers, ordinary men who, with one stroke of political fate, lost everything. They were stripped of their homes, their freedom, their dignity, and thrown into one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Soviet Gulag wasn't just a prison system. It was a crucible, a place where human illusions were burned away until nothing remained but raw survival. If there was ever a laboratory for testing human loyalty, this was it. And what it revealed has haunted men for generations. Inside the frozen camps of Siberia, the myth of unconditional devotion collapsed. It wasn't destroyed by theory, but by observation. Men saw with their own eyes what happens to love when the lover has nothing left to give. They watched vows dissolve when keeping them meant embracing suffering without end. They learned that loyalty without reward rarely survives. Every day, the pattern repeated itself until it was impossible to ignore. At first, there was hope. Letters arrived. Promises still felt real. Women wrote daily, then weekly, assuring their men that they were waiting. Packages of food and clothing followed, small lifelines that often meant the difference between life and death in those brutal conditions. But slowly, almost predictably, the flow weakened. Letters grew infrequent. Packages dwindled. Visits became harder to arrange. And then, silence. It wasn't sudden betrayal. It was the slow death of connection. But even worse than silence was what came next. Most women didn't simply fade away. They replaced. While their husbands froze behind barbed wire, many sought warmth in new arms. While men counted endless days inside cold cells, women were counting new beginnings with someone else. And what stunned the prisoners most wasn't that it happened, but how quickly it happened. Wives remarried within months. Fiancées were pregnant with another man's child before trials even ended. Husbands received divorce papers alongside death sentences. The speed of replacement felt like a knife twisting in the gut, because it showed just how fragile devotion really was. And yet, these betrayals weren't acts of cruelty in the traditional sense. They weren't fiery dramas of passion or revenge. They were practical decisions, cold calculations made under impossible conditions. Women weren't monsters. They were survivors. They didn't set out to destroy love. They adapted to a brutal new reality. And in that adaptation, one truth became impossible to deny. Love operates like currency. Affection, loyalty, dedication. These aren't timeless gifts freely given. They are investments tied directly to what you can offer, to the value you represent. The Gulag revealed that loyalty has limits, and those limits are painfully predictable. When a man loses his power, his resources, his ability to provide or protect, something shifts in the feminine psyche. The love that once felt eternal begins to fade like a photograph left too long in the sun. The loyalty that seemed unshakable cracks under the weight of survival. It is not a matter of morality. It is not about good women versus bad women. It is about instinct. It is about biology. It is about the ancient programming that decides who thrives and who is left behind. For the men who lived it, this was more devastating than the Siberian cold, because the physical cold could kill the body. But the emotional cold, the realization that the woman who swore forever had already moved on, killed something deeper. It killed the part of them that believed in permanent bonds. It killed the illusion that love was unconditional. That is the truth no man wants to face. But history has already proven it. If what you've heard so far challenges the way you see love and loyalty, make sure you subscribe. Because the truths that follow will go even deeper, and you won't want to miss them. The revelation from the camps was not just about abandonment. It was about replacement. And that distinction matters, because silence hurts. But silence can be explained away with excuses, distance, stress, pressure. Replacement, on the other hand, is undeniable. Replacement is a brutal statement. You are no longer valuable. Someone else has taken your place. And for the men who received that message in the most unforgiving conditions on earth, the impact was soul-crushing. Think about what that means. A businessman, once admired and respected, suddenly reduced to a prisoner. His wife remarried before the snow from his first winter behind bars had even melted. A decorated soldier, once celebrated as a hero, returned from the front lines only to find his fiancée carrying another man's child. A loyal husband, who thought his bond was sacred, opened an envelope, expecting words of comfort, and instead found divorce papers stapled to his death sentence. These weren't rare exceptions. They were patterns, so consistent, so widespread, that they could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. And here's the part that stings. These weren't women consumed by passion or blinded by lust. These were practical choices, almost bureaucratic in their efficiency. It was as if love itself was a contract, and the moment the terms were no longer met, the contract was terminated without hesitation. Men who thought their relationships were built on eternal devotion discovered they were built on conditions of status, security, and survival. But the Gulag did more than expose betrayal. It revealed the mechanics of loyalty itself. Loyalty wasn't a romantic miracle. It was a transaction, an exchange rooted in ancient instincts. Affection, dedication, devotion. These weren't gifts freely given. They were conditional investments, measured against a man's ability to provide and protect. When that ability vanished, so did the devotion. This wasn't about good women or bad women. It wasn't about morality. It was about nature. Women weren't plotting betrayal. They were reacting to a biological calculus written long before love songs and wedding vows. In an environment where survival was uncertain, staying loyal to a man stripped of resources wasn't just hard. It was dangerous. Choosing him meant choosing suffering, stigma, and starvation. And most women facing those odds chose to adapt. That's why the pattern cut across every line. Education didn't matter. Social class didn't matter. Age didn't matter. Whether she was a farmer's wife or a professor's fiancée, the outcome was often the same. Loyalty faded. Replacement followed. The exceptions, the women who resisted, stood out precisely because they were so rare. They became legends, remembered not for doing what was expected, but for defying every expectation. Their stories survived not because loyalty was common, but because it was extraordinary. And yet, in those rare exceptions lies another painful truth. Unconditional loyalty was possible, but only as anomaly, a statistical outlier. These women weren't just loyal to men. They were loyal to causes, to ideals, to identities so deeply fused with their partners that leaving would mean betraying themselves. Their devotion wasn't passive. It was active warfare against a system designed to break bonds. They endured hunger, exile, ridicule, and danger just to remain connected. And for that reason, they became immortal in memory. But their rarity only reinforced the larger lesson. The rule is abandonment. The exception is loyalty. If you think this doesn't apply today, think again. You've probably already felt the early warning signs in your own life. Lose a job and notice how her tone shifts. Struggle with confidence and watch how her affection cools. Get sick and suddenly the future plans sound less certain. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself she's just stressed. But deep down, you sense something else. The ancient machinery recalculating your value. This is the truth that comfortable men rarely confront. Loyalty feels unshakable when everything is going well. But when the foundation of your worth erodes, so too does the devotion you thought was permanent. For the men trapped in those frozen camps, the harshest blow was not the cold, the hunger, or the endless labor. It was the moment they realized the love they depended on no longer existed. That realization came not in whispers, but in brutal clarity. A letter that stopped arriving. A package that never showed. A visitor who promised to come, but never did. And then, finally, the message every man dreads. She had moved on. She had chosen another. That was the moment of collapse, because up until then, a man could survive on illusions. He could tell himself his suffering was temporary, that the bond waiting outside the barbed wire was unbreakable. But when that illusion shattered, when the anchor of devotion snapped, something inside many men died. Not their bodies, their will, their very sense of identity. They weren't just prisoners in chains. They were men without meaning. And without meaning, survival became impossible. Many did not make it. They withered, not from frostbite, but from hopelessness. Their bodies gave out because their minds had already surrendered. The betrayal had destroyed them more efficiently than starvation ever could. But not all shared that fate. Some men, when confronted with the same devastation, responded differently. Instead of letting betrayal break them, they let it forge them. The transformation didn't come from denial. It didn't come from pretending it didn't hurt. It came from facing the pain head-on, then using it as fuel for something new. These men killed the part of themselves that needed external validation. They buried the desperate craving for someone else's approval, and in its place, they built something unshakable. What emerged was a kind of sovereignty no external force could touch, a state where a man's worth came from within, not from promises, not from devotion, not from anyone else's loyalty. One survivor described the exact moment. He stood in the snow, holding a letter in numb hands. His wife wrote not to comfort him, but to announce her new marriage. He felt something collapse inside him. But then, in the ruins of that collapse, something else was born. Not revenge, not bitterness, but a cold, unbreakable clarity. He compared it to watching the last sunset of his old life and the first sunrise of a new one. The death of illusion, followed by the birth of sovereignty. The men who endured this transformation spoke of it like metal in a forge. Betrayal was the fire. Pain was the hammer. Every blow stripped away weakness, reshaped identity, and left behind something harder, stronger, impossible to break. These men reframed betrayal. It wasn't just a wound, it was data. Instead of asking, "Why did she do this to me?" they asked, "What does this teach me about reality?" They turned tragedy into wisdom, heartbreak into understanding. Then they built new structures inside themselves, disciplines no one could steal, rituals that depended on no one else. They trained their bodies when conditions were unbearable. They disciplined their minds when chaos reigned. They created meaning through action rather than waiting for it to be given. They discovered that when you stop needing loyalty, you come into the kind of man who might inspire it. But by then, you no longer depend on it. This is the paradox of masculine growth. You receive what you once craved only after you no longer need it. True strength does not come from being loved. It comes from being complete without love. It does not come from validation. It comes from sufficiency without validation. It does not come from being needed. It comes from needing nothing outside yourself to survive. Those who made this shift described it as developing the discipline of stone. Principles that could not be eroded by betrayal, abandonment, or suffering. They woke at the same time every day, no matter the conditions. They trained, no matter how broken their bodies felt. They built, even if no one noticed. They pursued their craft, even without recognition. They became their own structure in a world designed to tear structure apart. And that is the lesson men in comfort rarely learn. Your mission must always be stronger than your need for love. The men who survived best were the ones who discovered something greater than relationships, something stronger than love. They found purpose. They found a mission that could not be taken away by betrayal, abandonment, or death. And in the Gulag, that purpose became the dividing line between those who perished and those who endured. For some, the mission was artistic. They carved beauty out of despair, writing words that would outlive the barbed wire. For others, it was intellectual. They pursued truth even as lies crushed the world around them. For others still, it was spiritual. They clung to faith, not as comfort, but as defiance against hopelessness. Some turned to the practical. They mastered small crafts, built systems, created order in chaos. The form didn't matter. What mattered was that the mission came from within, not from outside. A man whose mission depends on a woman's validation is building his life on sand. A man whose meaning depends on romantic love is fragile. A man who needs to be needed has already given away his power. The camps revealed this with merciless clarity. Only purpose born inside you can survive the collapse of everything outside you. This doesn't mean rejecting women. It doesn't mean isolating yourself. It means something deeper. It means establishing your mission first. It means creating a foundation that no betrayal can crack. A mission so strong that love can join it, but never define it. A mission so rooted that no one else's loyalty determines whether it stands. Think of it like a North Star. When all other lights go out, when promises fail, when affection fades, your mission remains. It keeps you moving through the storm. It anchors you when everything else shakes. The men who discovered this truth survived. The men who didn't, those who relied on devotion to keep them alive, perished. And that's where most men today still fail. They believe their woman's loyalty is the bedrock of their lives. They think if they sacrifice enough, provide enough, love enough, they can secure something eternal. But history, biology, and brutal reality say otherwise. Devotion is not guaranteed. Loyalty is not unconditional. The only constant you can rely on is the mission you forge within yourself. Here is the paradox. When you stop needing women's loyalty, you become the kind of man who actually inspires it. But by then, it no longer matters, because your survival doesn't depend on it. This shift changes everything. Instead of chasing validation, you generate it. Instead of being defined by devotion, you become defined by discipline. This is what sovereignty looks like. It is not about closing your heart. It is not about hating women. It is about building yourself into a man who cannot be broken by abandonment. Your mood no longer depends on hers. Your direction no longer depends on her support. Your value no longer depends on her validation. You become like a mountain, solid, unmovable, complete. She can climb it, admire it, rest on it. But the mountain does not need her to exist. When you reach this state, loyalty becomes a gift instead of a requirement. Love becomes an enhancement instead of a necessity. Connection becomes a choice instead of oxygen. You shift from desperation to freedom, and in that freedom, relationships transform. You are no longer clinging to devotion for survival. You are choosing companionship out of strength. The Gulag taught this with blood and frost. Men who found purpose stood tall despite betrayal. Men who didn't crumbled. And if you ignore this truth in your own life, you risk the same collapse. Your mission must be stronger than your need for love, because only purpose can survive when loyalty fails. The final lesson from the camps is the hardest to accept, yet it is the one that frees you the most. Female loyalty is not eternal. It is not unconditional. It is not guaranteed. And once you accept this, you stop clinging to illusions that were never real. This does not mean women are evil. It does not mean a VM is meaningless. It means that loyalty has limits, because life itself has limits. Devotion bends under the weight of survival. Love fades when the foundation it rests on collapses. And when you see this clearly, you stop fighting reality. You stop losing battles against laws of human nature that you never wrote. The men who learned this truth in Siberia suffered more than most of us ever will. They endured starvation, exile, betrayal. But from that suffering came a clarity that cannot be ignored. The clarity that love is a gift, not a guarantee. That loyalty is a condition, not a promise. That the only unshakable foundation a man can ever stand on is the one he builds within himself. When you understand this, betrayal loses its sting. You no longer see abandonment as a moral failure. You see it as data, as information about the real rules of the game. You stop asking, "How could she do this to me?" and start asking, "What does this teach me about life?" In that moment, pain turns into education. Loss turns into growth. Suffering turns into strength. The men who thrived after betrayal mastered this reframe. They took the worst experiences and turned them into fuel. Betrayal became proof of reality. Abandonment became an invitation to build systems that no one else could control. Loss became the chance to forge resilience. They stopped expecting what was never realistic, and in doing so, they found freedom. Because here is the paradox. When you release women from the obligation of unconditional loyalty, you release yourself from the need for it. When you accept that love has limits, you transcend those limits in yourself. When you know betrayal is always possible, you become immune to its power. You become a free man. And the free man loves differently. He gives without demanding. He commits without needing equal commitment. He values her presence without making it his oxygen. He sees love as music, not air. Beautiful, enriching, powerful, but never required for survival. This freedom changes everything. It transforms relationships from banayos into choices. You are no longer desperate for loyalty. You are no longer terrified of abandonment. You can finally see women as they are. Not angels, not demons, but human. Conditional beings in a conditional world. And once you see that clearly, you stop suffering over what was never promised. That is the light hidden in the darkness. Not the light of fantasy, but the light of sovereignty. A light that no betrayal can extinguish. The men in the Gulag paid with their lives to learn this truth. You don't have to. You can accept it now. You can use it to build strength before life tests you. The dark truth about female loyalty is not that women are bad. It is that reality doesn't care about our illusions. But if you are willing to face it, if you are willing to strip away the pretty lies, you can find a freedom that cannot be touched. Internal sovereignty, a state where you need nothing outside yourself to stand tall. And once you reach that place, you will never fear betrayal again. If this message struck a nerve, don't just close the video and forget it. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the truths that most men will never hear anywhere else. Share this video with a brother, a friend, or anyone who needs to see the world without illusions before it's too late. The more men who understand this, the stronger we all become. This channel isn't about comfort. It's about clarity, strength, and freedom. And subscribe now, and let's build a generation of men who can't be broken by betrayal.